Hello and welcome to Miss Hannah Loves Grammar. In this video we'll be considering what the effect is of using a subordinate clause. A subordinate clause, or a dependent clause, is a constituent or main part of a complex sentence. The function of the subordinate clause is to add information to a main clause of a complex sentence. It's a subordinate clause because the sentence itself could not make sense simply because of the subordinate clause. Now that sounds a bit technical and tricky, so let me unpick it with this example. Even though it was a bright day, Paul refused to go outside. Now the subordinate clause has been emboldened for you now. The main clause has not. If I put a full stop and started my sentence with the word Paul refused to go outside, it makes sense. I've got my subject, it's Paul. I've got the verb, it's the fact he refused. And the object is really the fact that he's not going outside. This is not the case with what is the subordinate clause. Even though it was a bright day, I've got my subject, the fact that it was a bright day. And it was is the auxiliary verb that's being used here. But in essence, the subordinate clause cannot make sense on its own because it doesn't have an object in this instance. And so, because it's not a complete sentence, it has particular effects for the reader. The first clear effect of using a subordinate clause, by very nature of using a complex sentence, is that the two or more ideas that are combined in the single sentence through the subordinate clause and the main clause being linked together push us on as readers to infer further details on what is happening. For example, in the sentence that I've just shared with you, the fact that Paul refuses to go outside even though it's a bright day suggests he has some struggles about moving outside or some deeper worries that keep him indoors. It helps us to infer that information very clearly. Equally, a subordinate clause pushes us to want that additional information to finish the thought. It pushes us to consider as we continue to read how tension is being built up by the writer. When it says, even though it was a bright day, I'm already thinking, what about that bright day? Why does it matter? Let's take another example now. Lydia choked on her lunch. She was in a hurry. Hit pause as you identify which part of this sentence contains the subordinate clause, and be ready to explain why. So, how did you get on? Well done if you correctly identified that it was the second half of the sentence after the comma, which said she was in a hurry. We're left pondering, why is she in a hurry? What's happening? Why is it important? Lydia choked on her lunch, however, is the main clause. It makes sense on its own. I've got my subject, Lydia. I've got the verb, the fact that she choked. And the object, unfortunately, is her lunch. Or maybe it should be unfortunate that Lydia is choking. I'm not sure. The question we should ask ourselves, though, if we're truly referencing the importance of the subordinate clause, is what is the reason why it is placed where it is within the sentence? What is the significance of its order? So, in the first example, that it contained Paul, the subordinate clause comes first. And that heightens the sense that we as readers are intrigued about something going on that relates to this bright day. Even though it was a bright day, we're thinking, well, what about that bright day? How does that link to what we're learning next? Equally, in the second example, we learn something different from that subordinate clause, but this time it comes after the main clause. We're told the facts that Lydia choked on her lunch. But the question we're left pondering as we read the subordinate clause, she was in a hurry, is, well, why was she in a hurry? What was so significant about the reason why she needed to choke on her lunch? What stress is she under, for example? So, broadly speaking, you should be asking yourself, what is the significance of where the main clause is found and where the subordinate clause lies within a complex sentence? It makes sense for me to share with you some of the key words that you can expect to find in a subordinate clause. This list of words are subordinating conjunctions. They link together the main clause and the subordinate clause. And so you can pretty much assure yourself that if a clause begins with one of these words, it is subordinate by its very nature, and it cannot make sense by itself or stand alone. So whilst it might seem overwhelming with subordinate clauses, the reality is they add something extra. They push our inference skills as readers, and they also push us into a new realm of understanding of the world of the description or writing we're reading. They're quite critical to complex ideas being linked, and without them, we probably wouldn't be asking the important questions we should be of the writing or the writer. Why not subscribe to Miss Hannah Loves Grammar for all things English, literary, and grammatical?